Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest. Before I do that, here's a quote just for this podcast. I've always been a teacher at heart, Dr. Pat Heist. Our guest today is a new friend of the Culture Matters podcast. Boy, I've heard their name in such high regard for so long by one of our regulars we all love on the show, David Yerkes, Dr. David Yerkes. And Dr. Pat, not only is he apparently a singer in a band and at one point almost took a job at a hot pocket plant and a mobile home, had to work labor in a mobile home business, but actually had a background as a teacher, a student in microbiology, solving, we'll get into this, plant disease, turned co-founder of this unbelievable brand and really story and culture company in the spirits business, Wilderness Trails, background in consulting, Ferm solutions, still in existence over, thousands of, I guess, clients over the years, solving problems, going where the problems are. There's so much to talk about here, culture leadership. Dr. Heiss, it's an honor to have you on the Culture Matters podcast and learn about why you did all this and how. So, yeah, thanks so much for coming on the show. And I am curious about this Hot Pocket thing. I want to ask about that. And it was,
Yeah. Well, first
yeah,
of all, I appreciate you having me on the show. I'm flattered by the introduction for sure. The Hot Pockets thing was actually when I got out of graduate school. That was no, it was actually when I graduated with my bachelor's degree. That's when I was working at the mobile home place. And to clarify that, I was actually, have you ever seen a wide load going down the interstate? I was one of the escort trucks that was following,
wow.
to make sure that it can get across bridges and everything. But anyhow, whenever I graduated with my microbiology degree from the University of Kentucky, I was kind of surveying for jobs. And the best opportunity that I came across was as a quality assurance manager for Hot Pockets. So that was kind of I guess you could say I pivoted from that potential possibility and moved on to graduate school.
And do you remember? And why I think it's so inspiring to our listeners. Many are aspiring entrepreneurs, or they're in the throes of building something, or executives, a part of a culture like that you had. You remember that reflection, that discussion with yourself, like, do I go this way or do I go that way? All these years later, all the success, all the value that's been created. Someone listening is there right now thinking, am I going to do hot pockets or widgets or this or follow this passion?
Yeah, I mean, when I started college, like a lot of people who are interested in science, you think that your only possibilities are a doctor or a
Yeah.
pharmacist or a veterinarian or a dentist. And so I started off in pre-med, and the first time I took microbiology, the course, I just loved it, and that's when I changed my major to microbiology. So when I got looking at jobs after I got my micro degree, the Hot Pockets job was intriguing because I knew there would probably be the potential of finding some bacteria every now and then, but it really just didn't mesh with my passion, which is the study of microorganisms. And I just thought,
Wow.
I should move on in another direction that's a little bit more focused on what I really have found that I love doing. And that's what kind of turned me back. There was some other things kind of happening at that exact time relative to graduate school. Actually, I took a job. I took a summer job. I really didn't even plan on going to graduate school.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I took a summer job after my bachelor's degree, working for the Department of Plant Pathology in at University of Kentucky. And by the end of the summer, one of the professors just flat out said, "Hey, man, do you want to be a graduate student in our department?" And I was like, "Well, what does that mean?" And they're like, "Well, we'll pay your tuition, we'll get you a laptop, we'll give you a stipend." And I'm like, I did the math on it, and I'm like, let's see, I'm making 650 an hour here. It looks like I'm up for a raise here. So I kind of looked at it really as almost like a promotion. And I got into graduate school, was working
Wow.
on my master's degree, and that just kind of just haphazardly led to, well, hell, this is working out pretty good. I'll stick around and get my PhD, which I did. So for me, it wasn't really the plan. It was just the path that I needed to stay on to keep me doing what I was very passionate about. And that was the study of microorganisms.
Yeah, I want to make sure that so there may be a camp of listeners that really has a passion for the work that the brands and the product of what you created that may be curious. What does the study of microorganisms have to do with that? And then maybe there's a camp that doesn't even know about this wilderness trails yet that we can introduce to. So I guess for both camps in mind, what does the study of microorganisms, how does that, how did that create value or what does that have to do with this
Well,
this product or yeah,
Well,
how did it help?
if you look at the product, jumping way in the future to when we started a whiskey brand, there's a yeast. You use yeast to make alcohol. That's a microorganism. There are
Wow.
bacteria that contaminate the fermentation process, which is another, example of how microbiology play. That's kind of how I got into that. But, going back to when I got out of graduate school, well, and actually going back to what we were saying about the bachelor's degree, you get out, you think, well, what about this hot pockets opportunity? Well, it just wasn't, again, it wasn't along the path of what I felt like passionate about. But another thing I can tell people that are at that stage, whenever, now I'm here where I'm at, have had several successful businesses, is that you really don't know jack shit whenever you have a bachelor's degree. I mean, really, you don't. And what I've found is that, and when I look back at that point, how effective would I have been trying to do something like I do now? I wouldn't have been very effective because I didn't realize how much I lacked in education. And not
Wow.
only that, you look at a bachelor's degree, you get thrown, you're basically throwing spaghetti at the wall on, okay, I know what a bee's wings look like under the microscope. I know how to use a microscope. I know a little bit of this and I know a little bit of that. But it wasn't until I got in my graduate program that I realized, oh, wow, a master's degree is a degree that says I have mastered the techniques that are used in science so that I can, because it's all about the scientific method, the whole, and getting back to that, I mean, that's even non-scientists on their day-to-day lives. We make decisions based on observations. We come up with, if we formulate hypotheses, we test those hypotheses, and we go through the whole damn process every day of our lives. So whenever you know whenever I was getting out of graduate school, it let's see, I lost a little bit of my point here. Just about getting the experience to really do some damage out in the world. I didn't realize until I got my graduate degrees how essential that knowledge was. And the other thing, and I can even look at my own kids, my daughter got a job working at, Aerie at the mall, and she's like, all I'm doing is folding underwear, and I said, no, you're learning how to use a point of sale. You are
Wow.
you are developing a network. I've got a guy that works for me right now down in Costa Rica who was a waiter at a Mexican restaurant that I just happened to know when I was in Lexington. We reconnected and I'm like, "Hey dude, you're in Costa Rica. There's yeast business down there to have." And so he's an employee of ours now. So you people don't understand that, hey, even if I'm working at the mobile home lot here, which I did, a long time ago, I was developing a network. I still tap into those people. So no matter what you're doing, how crappy of a job you think you have, you're not only learning something, but you're developing a network. And I think that's
Mm,
something that people need to understand, that, and sometimes that can be more valuable than a college education. Putting the
wow.
pieces together on, when I do start a business and when I did start Wilderness Trail, Who was my business partner? The guy that I played in rock band with, and
Shane, right? Is
Shane
that
Baker.
Shane?
That's right. Yep.
What would you say that if he had a core value that, because many of the listeners are partners, they have
Yep.
partners in entrepreneurship, a core value that really stood out of his, they said, okay, this is somebody I'd be in business with. I'd be curious what you think his would be of yours.
Yep. So Shane and I are almost the same age. He's about a year older than me. And when we played in the rock band, I was finishing out my graduate career. Okay. So I'd been in graduate school probably 5 or 6 years after he had already graduated with a mechanical engineering degree. So we weren't
Wow.
the typical rock band. We were pretty loaded down with education. But he was working for Fortune 500 companies. He was working for, Toyota, learning about the management systems that they use. He was working for a couple companies in robotics and got a couple patents for some different materials and different things. So I always looked at Shane as just a really good business guy. And I'm more of the hyper. I'm the Flavor Flav, and he's the he's Chuck D. He's more of the guy get out in front, do the paperwork, figure out how the hell we're going to get these licenses, and being a mechanical engineer, we get 10 boxes of junk that shows up, and I'm like, what the hell's this stuff? And the
Mm,
next week we have a fully functional bottling line, where he put all
wow.
that crap together. So, just kind of looking at, what when you go into business, and I looked at this when we started Ferm Solutions. Ferm Solutions was a business that we came together and started a company that sells yeast and fermentation products to distilleries and breweries. And we came together and started that company at a very interesting time, right around 2006, 2007, when the
Yeah.
housing
Wow.
bubble and the whole damn market was going to shit. Getting lending around that time was very difficult. But we had this idea of, and I had actually consulted for a couple different companies that did this exact same work, and we had a falling out. And so Shane, it was like I called him up one day. I said, "Hey, dude, I think we should start this company." And he and I had talked about it on and off, and he was looking to get into biofuels at that time. He was kind of exiting out of like the automobile industry and coming over into looking to get into maybe biodiesel. And we talked about it. And we got into fuel ethanol was a huge thing that right
Mm,
around 2007, just kind of one of these fortuitous matters of timing. Right at the same time we were starting our company, which was kind of one of the reasons why we wanted to start this company, is because all of a sudden in the United States, there was the federal government mandated that by 2012, it was called the Renewable Fuel Standard. The federal government mandated that by 2012, the fuel ethanol industry would produce 12% of all the fuel used in the United States.
wow.
So that meant that the 25 fuel ethanol plants that existed then, which we were good friends with all those places, were getting ready to be 220 plants. So
25 to 220.
that's right. This industry blew up. And so, where we had expertise, and the other thing where I was consulting for other companies, I had some no competes and some different things, and it made it really nice. Well, hey, there's 100 new distilleries being built, and none of those are my previous customers. So it was a really good timing to, be able to get some business while we're waiting out some of those agreements. So, but back to Shane's, what does he bring to the table? He's very organized. He's a great business guy, and I'm the microbiologist. We sell yeast, we sell enzymes, so there's a lot of microbiology, biochemistry. But when you look at a factory that's using these supplies, a lot of times I'm going into a situation is like, hey, you have microbial contamination. You got bacteria growing in your fermenter. Well, Shane can go in there and figure out, well, it's because this pump isn't working properly.
Mm,
You're not pumping the material properly and you're not cleaning the tank properly. So we fix this pump, we get your cleaning supply working again. And then, so there's a lot of engineering that is very much a yin and yang situation. I mean,
mm,
I've jokingly said this before, but I've said, if it was up to Shane, everybody would have quit 10 years ago. If it was up to me,
I,
everybody would be on vacation every day. So if you take
I
kind
love
of
that.
the balance of those two things and you just have Shane's a great guy I mean, if we got big problems, he's a guy to send into the wasp nest. He can straighten out problems like that. I tend to be kind of the good cop, and the same plays out with our employees. So a lot of really cool push and pull and different things that have made our business relationship just a dream relationship, really.
I want to make sure that the crowd here really grasp that these are two successful businesses. One was consulting that evolved into producing, correct? It's
Yep.
really a
Yep.
very powerful story. But in one of your podcasts, you mentioned although the that story and brand, yes, is important. However, you highlighted how you said you lived the story, it became successful. Yeah, you lived the story, and the success then made the brand or made the story meaningful. Can you just unpack that a little bit? Because I thought there was something very a lot of like something profound, and the order matters in a sense. You had
Yeah.
mentioned that you can there's competitors out there or people they created a brand and then tried to or that first, like the order
Yeah.
matters. Can you unpack
Yeah.
what you meant by that?
Well, when you look at starting a whiskey brand, you got to ask yourself a question. Why don't the multi-billion dollar companies out there, why don't they just create new brands every day? I mean, in some cases they do, but where are they? Where are the successful ones? Name a successful whiskey brand that's just come along in the last 15 or 20 years. There's just not too many of them. They come and they go. But the big guys, the Jim Beam, Buffalo Trace, those guys are staple. They're set in stone. They're operating 100-plus-year-old distilleries or businesses or brands in some cases. So to get into this industry is extremely difficult to be successful, and a lot of people base it on, hey, I got a great story. My grandpa used to run a moonshine still, and I want to use that
Mm,
storyline
mm,
as a basis for my brand because there is a lot of storytelling in this industry. And when you look at the master distillers and what type of things they talk about the old days, and it gets people interested in the
mm.
brands. So, how do new brands get into this industry? You either get into it and have no business in it, and you get chewed up and spit out very quickly, or you come in with something new. And Shane and I, we didn't realize it, back to the story building part of it. What is our brand story? We started off with a company that goes into distilleries and breweries. And again, we sell yeast and fermentation products. So if the fermenter's not bubbling right, the first person you call is your yeast provider. Hey man, this damn yeast isn't working. And so what over the last couple decades, we've had our job is to service the hundreds of distilleries and breweries that we work for and supply products
Mm.
to of answering those phone calls of, hey, it's not the yeast. Your temperature's too high. Your pump's not working. You've got bacterial contamination. You've got a squirrel stuck in the recirculation line. I mean, there's a lot of
Wow.
problems that can happen at distilleries, but we got in there, and in many cases, this involves site visits. Hey, I got to come to your distillery. And just like going to the doctor's office where you're opening your mouth for them to swab your throat, we're going in and we're taking samples from throughout their process and looking at the microbiology.
Mm.
What's the problem? Where's the problem focused in the factory? And what do we do to solve that problem? And then the outcome is you're going to make a lot more alcohol. So, if you're working in the industry these days, you don't just walk out of Buffalo Trace Distillery and walk right into Maker's Mark and they're going to greet you with open arms and let you look at their whole process. But if you're pre-distillery and you're the yeast guys, you get in everybody's place. So very fortuitously for us, we were kind of building this like massive amount of knowledge of, I mean, there's so many different ways of making alcohol. I mean, how do you make rum? You're fermenting sugar or molasses. How do you make whiskey? You're fermenting grains. How do you make tequila? You're fermenting basically a cactus type of a plant.
Wow.
So there's very different ways of doing that, and we have custom. How do you make beer versus whiskey, for example? How do you make hard seltzer versus beer? So we have answered these questions. We deal with all those customers, and when it came time to start the distillery, we were just loaded, locked and loaded with all this great information that now when we talk about our brands, we can talk about every aspect, starting with the grain rolling in on the trucks, to how that grain is processed, to the starch,
Mm.
to the biochemistry of how the enzymes digest that starch to create sugar, to how the yeast utilize that sugar to make alcohol, the esters and the flavors, and then on, distillation, barrel aging. We've got the process locked down. And it's because of all that knowledge that we gained prior to starting the distillery, you know.
Wow. How did that, how would you say, yeah, looking at back, how did that impact the originating customer base?
Well,
That communication channel. That
yeah, well, I just did. Shane and I actually just did a little panel discussion at the Kentucky Bourbon Festival a couple weeks ago, and that was one of the questions was, what was the most challenging thing about starting your business? And one of the answers we had was telling all of our customers that we were starting a distillery. They're like, "Wait a minute, we just told you everything we did." But really, since we started a distillery, and I think it's also important to point out that even though we grew the distillery to the 14th largest bourbon producer in the world within 10 years, we started off as a one barrel a day operation, very
wow.
organic. We didn't start off with huge aspirations. And I think that's something else. And when you look at the industry right now, what the mistakes that are being made is they're starting off, you'll see 55 million. This is $100 million facility. It's like if you've got $100 million into the facility, what are you ever hoping to exit at one day to ever turn a profit? And these people are like doing this on loans in some cases.
Yes, yes, yes.
So,
Oh, that's
trying to think how I got to that little loop. We were talking about the distillery and the customers and how that they interact or how they reacted to it. They didn't like it a lot, but now that we've operated and we've gone from a pot still, very small production, we weren't that threatening to begin with, and so they're kind of like, oh man, you got your own distillery. But you know what? You guys are the educators. It's good that somebody holds the key to all this information because now, and I get this comment a lot on podcasts and stuff. It's like, it's very nice of this person to be giving this information, because usually I mean, this is really probably one of the paradigms of our business that is a little bit detrimental to the business. You're giving away your playbook every day almost. But it's kind of like one of those karmic things of like if you do the right thing in every situation or try your best, it's just going to come back to you. So we always try to look at things of like I don't really, this company is buying yeast from us right now. I don't want to be lawyering them like, hey, I just talked to you for 15 seconds, on the phone, and I'm going to charge you another 80 bucks. But again, when you look at it, yeah,
mm,
but that 15 seconds on the phone saved you $1 million. So it's a balance of how do I bill correctly for what I'm doing and get value for what I'm doing with the information that I've taken my whole life to gain, but also how do you just be a good person to be fair to people and you've got your fair share come to you. Don't be so worried about capturing every nickel. You do a combination of business and just the right thing.
mm.
And I think it comes back to you a million times over.
How I take that is you, you led by example, like the rising tide lifts all boats.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is a great industry for that because really If you look at the bourbon, just the bourbon industry itself, we have the Kentucky Distillers Association, we got the
Mm.
Kentucky Bourbon Trail. Everybody on that in that organization all meets together regularly. We all get along really great. It's just a very good
Mm.
camaraderie between distilleries. I mean, there's famous historic examples of when Heaven Hill burnt down. Jim Beam came to the rescue with the yeast and let them maybe buy some aged barrels and different things. Now you move out of the distillery and get to the distributors and the retailers, and it starts getting more of a competition. But at
Well,
our
that,
level,
ooh, oh, go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, but at
I
our
gotta
level,
jump
it's
in.
very friendly industry. And that's one of the reasons why we really love being in this industry. I mean, our
Mm.
customers buy us presents. I mean, it's kind of weird. Usually it's the other way around.
Well, this is the Culture Matters podcast, so I would love to explore that because they think of this word spirits, and I think of collaboration. What's the what's the spirit of, yeah, okay, your customers buy you, there's collaboration. What, wine and spirits. Why is it called that? What's the history behind like what's the history of it, whiskey, right? That's a big branch, and
Yeah.
then bourbon is a subset of that, like
Yeah.
wine to
Bourbon is a type
champagne
of, yeah, you
or
got
something.
Scotch, bourbon whiskeys, Irish whiskeys. There's a lot of different types of whiskeys around the world.
So I
Bourbon
guess
can only be made in the United States.
now, yes. So what's the history or the and the culture of the the I guess the spirit of the craft a bit, like
Well, whenever you look at historically, early very skilled whiskey makers were immigrants from like Ireland,
huh,
Scotland. They have rich distilling histories. And those were the immigrants that settled in Appalachia and brought their expertise. And a lot of it was rye whiskey. They were making rye whiskeys because that's what they made. But now here you are over in the new world, and all of a sudden you've got availability of a lot of corn. So let's start incorporating that into this product. And that's where the beginnings of, okay, now we have America's signature spirit, which is bourbon whiskey, can only be made in the United States. And it has a rule that it must be made with a recipe of not less than 51% corn. So it is a spirit that has laws associated with it. Much like Scotch whiskey can only be made in Scotland, tequila can only be made in Mexico, cognac can only be made in Cognac, France. So there are
really?
spirits all around the world. Champagne, where do you think that's made at? Champagne.
Wow.
So there's rules about, there's other spirits like vodka. You can make that anywhere in the world. You can make rum anywhere in the world. You just have to make it out of sugar. So there's different rules with different spirits. But the camaraderie of the bourbon industry has always been really it's a great thing to be a part of at the level that we're at.
Mm. I'm also curious about those so original customers of the distillery, right? That product that you were providing, how did they relate to the knowledge, the story, because having gotten to know you now, even in this short time, it seems uh, teaching is at heart, right? Knowing what you're doing, what its purpose is. So was that a big part of how you sold it and how you created a customer base? Is just explaining and teaching? I'm curious about that because
Absolutely, absolutely. And when I reflect back at, oh, microbiology is my passion, microbiology is my passion, but my real passion is teaching. And that has always been something that I've always just carried with me. And I always, like a lot of the events that we do are very education. It's like you're getting a lecture. You probably feel
yep.
like that maybe in some aspects of our podcast here. But
I'm learning a ton. So thank you.
it's just always been in my nature. And so I realized that as we were creating our brand, wow, people really are like they're impacted by this. They want to hear that additional information from someone of authority. A lot of these brands and a lot of the people who represent different brands, they are just coming in kind of at the ground level and say, okay, your job is going to be to represent the brand. Here's the story, here's the basic
Mhm.
information, and they're just kind of going around, and it's a little bit disingenuous. If you listen to these some of these people, it's like, well, they don't have anything to do with this brand. They're just regurgitating a story that, and by the way, this brand doesn't even have their own production facility. They're buying the product from somewhere else. And so when we've seen a lot of value in that as well, of being the ones, we're a very genuine brand. We started off, another thing about whiskey is because it's so capital intensive, a lot the two things that distilleries almost always do when you start, you buy whiskey off somebody else and you sell that to get your brand going until yours is ready. So we kind of drew a line in the sand, and it's because we had firm solutions shelling off a bunch of capital that made our job easier. We kind of had an easier job than most people who are just jumping over into the distillery. But um, let's see, I was trying to make a point there about we jumped off distillery. Shit, I can't remember where the hell I was going with that. But I was going to make a damn good point. I just forgot what I was talking about.
Have you always been well the goal of the Culture Matters podcast is to make curiosity cool. It's always been about exploration. So thanks for coming on the show. Perfect guest. Right. So have you always been would you consider curiosity one of your core values, or exploration or discovery? And I'm asking, so I'm asking that because one of the I'd like to bridge the gap if we can in this show, because one thing, many of the entrepreneurs listening, you had essentially made businesses more money before you decided to create a business vertical that could become very successful economically.
Yeah.
This show, yeah, we're talking about some abstract concepts here or details, but this is a very successful business that you and your partner created. So I have two parts. One is, do you consider yourself curious and exploratory in your thinking, or what's your take on that? And then the second is, how do we bridge the gap in this episode on how you actually created so much value, economic value for these businesses? And
Yeah.
is there a
So
connection?
Yeah, so I've definitely always been a curious individual. I mean, I didn't realize it till like, when I graduated high school, for example, I got the science award, and it kind
Wow.
of really, even
Wow.
though I probably went to one of the worst schools in Kentucky back when Kentucky was the worst in the nation. So, getting the science degree from the worst school in the world, I don't know how proud of a thing that is. But anyhow, it just kind of made me realize it's just like when somebody believes in you. When you're young and somebody tells you you did a good job at something, you just realize, oh well, I'm good at that, And it just stuck with me that yeah, okay, science is. But at the high school level, when you hear science, what do you think about? You think about all the stuff, volcanoes and
Yeah,
different
yeah.
things. But having gone through my graduate career and really been put to the test, especially like on my qualifying exams and different things, one of my professors asked me the question, what is science? What is science? And it just kind of hit me hard, I was like, well, golly, that's a difficult question. And then he just simply summarized it for me. It's like science is the search for the truth you know?
Wow.
And something else that exact same professor told me right before, he actually is the one that pulled the strings for me. His name's Bill Neesmith from the University of Kentucky. And he kind of took me under his wing when I got that job work for the department during that summer. And he told me, he said, you have incredible powers of observation. And then it really just hit with me of, wow, powers of observation, that's the first step of the scientific method. And so your question about curiosity, absolutely. I'm always looking at things, and I rarely ever read anything that's not work related. I'm like looking at stuff. Some people
Oh
that I
man.
hang out with on a daily basis, it annoys them because I don't. I literally spend a lot of time looking around, and I see things different. I mean, things even at my home that I've looked at 1,000 times, I can find something different about it. Like, oh wow, that's
Mm.
different than it was the other day. So I definitely have a curiosity that that really plays well into that first step of the scientific method of the powers of observation. Now, the second part of your question, how does that lead to value? I think I don't know. I've always been super hyper aware of other people. I'll start thinking, are they getting aggravated about, well before that might have even occurred to them, they're getting
Wow,
aggravated.
wow.
So
Yeah, yeah,
I
wow.
think that hyper awareness
Mhm.
of customers, how are they feeling right now? Are they getting treated the right way right now? Whether I'm the one talking to them or my employee or a colleague or whatever. And I've just always been very mindful of other people's feelings. And I think part of that stems from that, the power of observation. What's that little what'd you do that with your eye just then, to make me
Mm,
believe that you're uncomfortable. And so I'm just, even if somebody's not uncomfortable, I might feel like I just saw a cue that made me believe
mm.
that. So it's just a hyper awareness, and I think that has played well into, bringing a very excellent customer experience to not only our yeast and our fermentation customers, but also, in the whiskey business. That's a very customer driven business, and you want to make people happy and make them feel included, make them feel part of the club. And, that's my expertise.
What you physically were at or have been from firm solutions over 1,000 essentially businesses, correct? Observing,
Yep. Yep.
deeply
Oh,
entrenched.
yeah. Yep.
What would even anecdotally, some of the variables that clearly that our entrepreneurs and leaders in business could take that clearly connoted success, even anecdotally. Like, I know you went to the problems, right? You were going to
Mhm.
the problem situation to solve, but were there patterns that you observed of the successful, the most successful businesses, what they had in common?
Well,
I mean, I guess we could invert too, like Charlie Munger, always invert, say, what did they all do wrong? But maybe I don't want to put you, let's focus on the positive.
well,
We can go
I
either way
think,
with that, I guess, but
I've looked at this a lot of different ways, and I've,
yeah,
philosophized about it a lot of different ways. And in looking back at, what really made us successful was not only, I mean, you could say being in the right place at the right time. Oh, I just happened to be there when that plane crashed with all the gold in it or something, But there's also, what did you do with that opportunity? I could have said, well, hell, I was driving by in my car so fast I didn't have time to stop. I would have been a billionaire if I'd have done that. And I think with Shane and I, and this is where I think a lot of businesses don't do as well as they could, especially when they're strapped with a lot of corporate encumbrances.
yeah.
There's a nimbleness to it. Like for example, when we were starting our whiskey business, we started off with the intention of developing a brand. That's always been at the forefront of Wilderness Trail bourbon, Wilderness Trail rye whiskeys. We're going to make these brands popular. But what we found out, and this is again being the guys in the industry that people call with problems. Hey, your damn yeast isn't working. Well, hell, over the years, that has evolved in our customers call us with any question possible. Hey, I'm hiring a new lab manager. Do you know anybody? Any of your students or anything? Blah, blah, blah. There's all these questions we get. So we started getting at some point in our business very early on questions about contract production. Do you know anybody that can make 500 barrels for us? Do you know anybody that can make 1,000 barrels? And what we realize is, holy crap, all the big brands that used to make whiskey for all these other brands, they're saying, man, bourbon boom is happening, folks. We're not making whiskey for you anymore. We're focusing on our own brands. So we made the observation, because we're the guys again through our network of, can you make all these barrels? And we just said, if we have a distillery, instead of making 1 barrel a day, if we have a
Mm,
distillery that can make 220 barrels a day, which is what we ended up going to,
wow.
which made us again the 14th largest producer in the world. That decision was made because we had all this opportunity of making barrels for other people. And
Mm,
whenever you've got okay, if I make X amount of barrels for $1 million and I can make $10 million off of those barrels and I get all the money a week before I make the barrels, do you even have to write that into a spreadsheet to figure out if it works or not? Me and Shane are like, hell no, buddy, let's do it now. So
wait. Ooh, wow. Yeah,
being
yeah.
able to execute with surgical precision at the moment that you need to, I think that's another huge thing where opportunities present
Mm,
themselves to us every day. Did you even notice it? Or were you on your phone? If you did notice it, how do you
mm,
take advantage of that opportunity? What can I do to capture it so that I don't just walk by and it's a missed opportunity? So that is, I can see 5 or 6 different spots in the development of our businesses where if we had it, we saw it, so we'd recognize the opportunity, and by the next damn day, we're off to the races on getting it done. I'll give a hell of a lot of credit back to Shane on that because he's the guy that does that kind of stuff.
wow.
You want to
That's
build a
inspiring.
factory in 6 months that normally takes 2 years, that's the guy.
Mm. Uh, Knowledge, data, observation.
Experience. Because again, the data, and I see this every day, we get customers who are multi-billion-dollar companies that call us for help. And I'm like, why would they not have the internal capability of helping themselves? Because we've got more knowledge than
Yeah.
they've got. And we've got more, not more knowledge, more experience. Because sometimes it's not just the data. A lot of times when we get approached, the customer, I'm asking them, are you not running this test? And they're like, yeah, yeah, we're running that test. And then they hand me the data. I look at the data. I'm like, well, here's your problem. So it wasn't that they weren't generating the data, it's they weren't interpreting the data properly. And that's what goes beyond. I mean, it takes a hell of a lot of science to know how to run these machines, gas chromatography, liquid chromatography. But if all you know how is to run the machine and get the answer, but you don't know how to interpret the answer, that's where the experience comes in.
I want your advice, your analysis on this. I've been thinking about this for some time, and it's not really done. But it's like, content and sacrifice, or like the trade of time. So like we call that what? So content and time equals experience. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Multiplied by time is wisdom. Something like along
Yep.
the like so you have your education, you have your, and what does that even mean, right? That's a very broad terms, like
Yep.
formal, informal, interpersonal, but let's just say content. Clearly, you're
Mhm.
such a master of the content of this craft. Then I want to ask you about this, like time, the timepiece. It sounds like the data, they had the data, but the interpretation comes from the sacrifice.
Yep.
It's like you went to thousands of these businesses and you observed. It's like I can have $1 trillion. If I don't go there, I don't know. Or I'm the guru. I've written 70 books, but I didn't go
Yep.
there. So that's how I'm interpreting the sacrifice of time.
Yeah.
So like content and the sacrifice of my time leads to this experience thing you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then if I then there's, and I'm like thinking like time again. Well, how many years? So example, content, if I put 1,000 out, and someone asks you a question about this, like how many hours you put in to become a master, right? If somebody puts in 1,000 hours, they have the same content, and even the same ability, let's say natural ability. One sacrifices 1,000 hours in a year, one sacrifices 100 hours in a year. Different experience.
Yeah.
Over a 10-year period, different wisdom. Over a 2-year period, different wisdom. So I'm just throwing this, but you got me excited.
Yeah. Well,
So
well,
I'm
who were your
curious to your thoughts on
mentors?
this.
Yeah, who were your mentors during that time? So there's also a quality of the experience because I could spend 10
Oh, that's
years
great.
under a master, you could spend 10 years under an idiot, and we would come out very differently, even though we spent the same amount of time. So, kind of going all the way back to what we were saying, when I was looking at the Hot Pocket job, I didn't know how valuable I could become in the future.
Mm.
I didn't know it at that time. And that's why my advice and what we said then was, why didn't I take that job? Because it didn't mesh with my passion. And I needed more information. I wasn't ready. If I'd have took that job, I would have stopped there with my learning. Outside of
Wow.
learning how to about put pepperoni in hot pockets. And it's just you don't know. It's just like if you stay with what you're passionate at some point in time, you will get valuable enough that all of a sudden people are ringing you off the hook. It's like, damn, how in the hell did that all of a sudden become so popular? Well, because you got so damn good at it
Mm.
that you made it popular. So a lot of people they look at what their passion is, but they really don't understand what it means to master something. And I would not have understood that myself had I not got to a point of where I reflected on all the shit that I did. It's like I didn't know I was doing it at the time, but I can say now with confidence to someone who is at that point in their life, keep digging until you've got
Mm.
all the materials you need to build what it is you're wanting to build. And people also have different, you know, what is your goal intellectually?
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
I didn't know how important it would be to me to get a PhD. I just, even when I
Yeah.
was getting that degree, I didn't know what the hell I was going to do with it. But I just thought that is a nice mark of excellence. It's like being an Eagle Scout, which Shane is an Eagle Scout, by the way.
Wow. Wow.
It's just one of those marks of accomplishment. Anyone getting a degree, or there's different levels of, oh wow, I went through that program, I excelled in it, and I got the degree. So there's just different levels of accomplishment, and I think people got to look at, some people don't want to go through all that shit. I'm really bad at trying to tell people what to do, because I see it. If
Well,
you just do this, you got so much opportunity. But some people don't want to do all that crap. They just want to.
well, I want to shake them for a second because we do believe in education, and that can mean that's a broad term, but it's one of our core values at Culture Matters, education. Entrepreneurs, this is my opinion, but I like your opinion of this opinion. Oftentimes are told, don't worry about school or it's not important, or it's just about the network. But isn't it also what happens to us through the process? So like so I would like your opinion on that. What the value of education is for entrepreneurs. And where would you recommend someone that feels intimidated? They might feel intimidated to start or go back to school, or start. You know what I'm saying? Say
Yeah,
you came from humble beginnings. Is would be clear, has become clear.
yeah, absolutely.
Humble beginnings. And you just one step at a time, and you what you and your partner have created is a very small percentage of humans in the United States, right? A country of prosperity and opportunity will ever and have ever accomplished. Right? This is a very so something to be proud about. But so yeah, curious of your opinion on the value of education for entrepreneurs, for business leaders, and then of course on the piece of like getting started. If someone, there's an intimidation or tomorrow or something of that, because you're a teacher even now, right? Adjunct professor. You must see
Yep,
people going back to school.
yep, yep. Still, yeah. I mean, I definitely see the value of education, but I also see the value of things that, I mean, because a lot of times people look at education as, oh, well, that's my high school, that's my college. They don't look at folding underwear at Aerie is part of education, because that's
Yep.
where I learned my point of sale. That's where I networked with these. That's how I learned to deal with the most difficult asshole that I've ever had to deal with in my life. And I will always remember how I dealt with that person. So
Yep.
I think there's lessons to be learned every day of your life in every situation. So when people think about education, don't discount just day-to-day living. And if you get into the right job and you're just super passionate about it, you become an expert in that and have more value than someone with a PhD that just got a degree and wasn't really focused on how they're going to utilize that. I think
Mm.
that's really a problem with a lot of people who are in graduate school. because you don't know what the future holds, and I mean, it's just one of those things. You got to live your life, and but back to the question of, you know, what is the advice for someone who think, well, should I go back to school? Should I? It's like if you're in a situation and something is pulling at you and you're not you're losing sleep at night or whatever, that's your inner consciousness telling you to do something different than what you're doing right now.
Wow.
And if that is going back to school, again, I think, you know, people got to set with things. It never hurts to take a year to just, I'm going to take 1 year and I'm not going to do any rash decisions. I'm just going to
Mm.
think on this for a solid year. I'm going to write down pros and cons. And then at the end of the year, I'm going to make my decision. You know, maybe that's 3 months or 6 months or whatever. But, you know, I think that, you know, people need to kind of don't be in such a hurry to what do I got to do? What do I got to do? You know, it's just some things just take time. And so long as you are living a comfortable, you know, you're living a comfortable existence and, you know, not being bothered too much, then it doesn't hurt to take a year. You know, if you're in an extremely uncomfortable situation, then maybe you need to get the hell out as quickly as possible. But I think there's different levels of the urgency of what do I need to do now, you know?
Final advice for our listeners on now. You've seen sabotage, the small businesses, self sabotage, or even in team members or people that may have had the opportunity early on to become a part of something. Like, what are ways that we you've seen self sabotage? Without naming names, of course, okay?
Yeah.
But self sabotage, the blind spots that come with business that as a
Well, you know,
consultant.
in this industry, you know, drinking with people is a lot of our job, you know. And if that's your
Yeah.
job, you got to really be
Wow.
careful of, you know, you may become an alcoholic. And or you
Wow.
may get to the point where you're making a jackass in front of yourself, in front of all the people you're supposed to be bringing over to your brand. And so that's an example of self-sabotage, and we've seen it a million times of, you know,
Yeah.
someone start their own brand and they're doing really great and they're loving, they're passionate, but they get too drunk, you know. So that's an example. Don't get too, and you can look at the food industry too. You know, how many morbidly obese
Yeah.
chefs are there, you know? So not that you can't still be a successful chef, but back
Well, if
on
you die, yeah, you
balance of
can't. Yeah.
personal and health and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, you know, you really got to think about those things. So whatever you're doing, you got to not indulge too much in what it is that you're trying to profess, you know. So
Wow.
I guess that would be one example.
Mm. Dr. Heist, you're welcome back anytime. I got a million more questions. We'll have to get into, we never got yet into, the dis-ease of plant,
Then we
what
didn't
if it
talk
was
about medical
farming.
microbiology professor either. I actually did that
Oh
too.
man, if you're welcome back anytime. What an inspiring story. I've got a lot to think about, and I want to show you. I'll have to show you. I have it's in my bag over there. I'll show you after. But the joyful wisdom in my bag. When you talk about the scientific method, it's like it's about right, the philosophy of science, essentially. And I was thinking about what an inspiring episode of the Culture Matters podcast. This is why we do what we do. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and I definitely owe David some dinner after this. So
Nice.
thank you
I
for
look
coming on the
forward
show.
to part two, maybe.
Absolutely. What a gift. If you're listening to this episode, where can people follow you, get in contact with you? Maybe there are companies that want to retain you, because Firm Solutions, you're in business. You're helping people every day, right?
Yeah, yeah, yep.
Well, how can they get in touch with you? They want to work with you and bring you in,
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
have
yeah.
you
We're
speak at
pretty,
their.
you know, you can find firm as in fermentation, firm solutions on the web. You know, we got a pretty robust website. I think we got social media. I've got social media myself, Patrick Heist. I can't remember exactly what my handles are, but if you put that in a Google search, it'll probably pop up on my stuff. But yep, Wilderness Trail Distillery, Firm Solutions, Dr. Pat Heist. There's a lot of ways to figure out things that we've done.
If you're listening to this, please share this with a friend. Leave us a review on the Culture Matters podcast, and we will see you next time. Thank you.